Afghanistan. At the crossroads of the Silk Road, it gathered the treasures of the ancient world. An impossibly rich mosaic of cultures left their history written in the ground. But in the last 3 decades, war and terrorism devastated Afghanistan's cultural legacy. Yet in this place, which has endured invaders as fearsome as Alexander the Great and Genghis Khan, the past won't die. Now, 2 men set out on historic quests to rediscover Afghanistan's greatest lost treasures. One, a Russian archaeologist, seeks to prove the existence of one of the ancient world's greatest troves, containing more gold objects than the tomb of King Tut.
Not a single treasure in the world is such a detective story.
The other, an Afghan archaeologist, is on the trail of riches greater than gold, one of the largest statues ever created. This colossus may survive in the rubble where the Taliban destroyed its 2 giant brothers.
I will offer up the 1,000-foot Buddha as a response to the Taliban.
Across Afghanistan, treasures re-emerge into a nation reborn. Each came to light because of the courage of Afghans who risked death to take on extremists threatening their heritage.
We didn't allow our heritage to be destroyed. Why? A country which has no culture has no history.
To build their future, heroic Afghans reclaimed their past, the lost treasures of Afghanistan. With the guns of Afghanistan all but silent for the first time in decades, those with deep roots here can finally come home. Afghan-American Nadia Tarzi heads an association dedicated to preserving Afghan antiquities. She also raises funds to support the work of her father, a world-renowned archaeologist. Nadia grew up in Europe, where she dreamed of this moment, the first time she would ever set foot in Afghanistan, a homeland she's never known.
I've been waiting since I'm 13 to come here. Gul Mamad is this loyal friend of the family for over 40 years. To finally meet him, it's very emotional, because we've been longing to meet each other. I just feel like I'm coming home. I'm finally here, but what's really hard is that I'm late. I missed out on knowing Afghanistan, as beautiful as it was then.
Nadia can't linger in Kabul. Her destination is some 150 miles to the west. There, in the Bamayan Valley, Nadia's father, Dr. Zamaryalai Tarzi, is searching for a treasure of monumental importance for Afghanistan. For the first time, Nadia will take part in one of her father's excavations. The two haven't seen each other in more than a year. But between them lie 10 hours of bad roads and relics of the wars that kept Nadia from coming to Afghanistan until now.
It's far more than what I expected and anticipated. It's more beautiful, it's more powerful. The people are even nicer than I could have imagined. It's a moment I've been waiting for my whole life, I think. That's my dad. Maintenant, je peux venir. Finalement, papa. C'est incroyable, là. J'ai tout regardé, j'ai pris des photos, j'ai pris 350 photos.
The Tarzi's reunion takes place in what has been called the world's most beautiful valley, Bamiyan. Here, nestled into the Hindu Kush mountain range, a 3-mile-long cliff dramatically soars 400 feet above the valley floor. It is dominated by the hundreds of Buddhist caves that were occupied by some 5,000 monks in Bamiyan's heyday. As Buddhism spread from India to China, it put down roots here and adorned this valley with monuments of faith. Once, 2 of the world's largest statues of Buddha earned Bamiyan the nickname Valley of the Gods. Then, in March 2001, the serene giants that had watched over Bamiyan for some 1,500 years fell. Blown up by Afghanistan's Taliban government.
I was wearing my slippers in the living room, watching the news. When I saw it, I threw one of my slippers at the television. I didn't want to watch. I screamed. This chapter will always be underlined in the history of Afghanistan. Future generations will know what they did. People need to know that at the beginning of the 21st century, savages came into Afghanistan to destroy its heritage.
Probably better than anyone in the world, Dr. Tarzi knew Bamiyan's giant Buddhas. In the 1970s, he directed their first and only structural restoration. War drove him to France and barred his return, until it was too late to save them.
It was as if a part of me stayed in Bamiyan while I was away. When you are studying an object, whether it be a small object or colossal monument, you consider it to be your personal belonging. It becomes your Buddha, your child, your loved one. So between me, a small and humble professor, and this big Buddha, there was a connection, an osmosis. This feeling was destroyed by the stupidity of man. I thought I'd turn the page on that moment in history, but since then I've fought.
Dr. Tarzi rarely visits the empty niches of the 2 giant Buddhas. But in the face of such profound pain, he didn't retreat. Instead, he hatched an audacious plan. Tarzi knew what the Taliban did not. In the rubble of the 2 destroyed Buddhas, there may be a 3rd giant statue that ancient texts claim is 1,000 feet long. Called the Sleeping Buddha of Bamiyan, it would be one of the largest statues ever created, fully as long as the Eiffel Tower. Dr. Tarzi intends to find it.
Since the destruction of the Bamiyan Buddha by the Taliban, the people of Bamiyan and Afghanistan have been searching for a way to avenge what the Taliban did. If I find it, I will offer up the 1,000-foot Buddha as a response to the Taliban by the people of Bamiyan and Afghanistan.
Discovering the sleeping Buddha would be sweet justice indeed, the best possible gift Dr. Tarzi could give his homeland. Still, its last recorded sighting was more than 1,000 years ago. Has the sleeping Buddha truly survived Afghanistan's tumultuous history? And in the vastness of Bamiyan Valley, how does he even know where to look? On a busy thoroughfare in Kabul, another giant of archaeology is also looking for the past. And for Russian archaeologist Viktor Sarianidi, seeing ruined Kabul for the first time in more than 2 decades is bittersweet. Already, he confronts memories of a younger self in a gentler era.
On my way from the airport, I was looking around, and there was nothing I could see that was familiar to me. That almost made me cry.
Dr. Sarianidi has been invited back to Kabul because the treasure that brought him fame may have returned from oblivion. Called the Bactrian Hoard, it is a collection of some 20,000 gold burial objects forged in the 1st century AD. In the 1980s, it vanished, melted down by warlords, it was rumored, or given as tribute to terrorist leader Osama bin Laden. Now, a treasure said to be the hoard has been found hidden beneath the presidential palace. Tomorrow, Sarianidi will be the guest of honor when the treasure is opened. He will settle once and for all one of the greatest archaeological mysteries of our time. It began on a hill much like this one called Tilla Tepe in northern Afghanistan. It was 1978, and Viktor Sarianidi was leading a joint Soviet-Afghan excavation. One day, he found the ground strewn with gold.
Of course I was overwhelmed. We were used to finding ceramics, bits and pieces of pottery, but definitely not gold.
In disbelief, Sarianidi and his team uncovered one grave after another. 5 women and 1 man. Each had been entombed with a king's ransom of plates, ornaments, baubles, all solid gold. Sarianidi estimated they had died around the time of Christ, and their burial objects told him they were probably royalty from a mysterious and warlike people. They were Bactrian nomads who'd grown rich, sacking cities left behind by Alexander the Great and preying on Silk Road caravans. They seemed to like flashy gold jewelry, which would glitter across the wide open spaces of their homeland. But Sarianidi and his team had little time to draw conclusions. The graves had to be excavated, and fast. Already, they'd amassed more gold objects than were found in King Tut's tomb. Moscow showed keen interest in the spectacle and sent the KGB to guard the dig. The Afghan army installed soldiers. Sarianidi cataloged the objects at double, triple the normal pace. There was more to discover, but time ran out. Sarianidi accompanied the priceless treasure back to the National Museum of Afghanistan in Kabul. But not long after, the Bactrian hoard disappeared as Afghanistan dissolved into chaos. In 1979, the Soviet Union invaded. For 10 years, they battled the Mujahideen, Afghan guerrillas, in a war so costly it helped bring down the Soviet Union. When the Soviets were driven out, Afghan warlords battled over the spoils. Their shelling destroyed half of Kabul. In 1993, a rocket crashed into the National Museum, one of the last known homes of the Bactrian horde. It was feared that most of its antiquities had by now been destroyed or looted. And it was about to get even worse. In 1996, the Taliban, a militia made up of Islamic fundamentalists, pushed back the warlords and seemed to offer peace. Yet one of their first acts in Kabul was to lynch the former Soviet-appointed president, Mohammad Najibullah. According to legend, he was the last person to lay eyes on the Bactrian horde. Haji Mullah Kaksar was once the Taliban Deputy Minister of Interior Affairs. He recalls how the Taliban defeated chaos and crime with strict new rules.
Basically, the Taliban offered a law, the law of the Quran. For example, if someone steals something, we cut off his hand. And if someone commits murder, we execute him. These are the very orders of the Quran.
But the harsh treatment of women disturbed Kaksar. So did the Taliban's war on art, inspired by the Quran.
The Quran prohibits portraying living things. If a person makes a portrait of another person, on Judgment Day, Allah will tell him, "You have competed with me. Now give it a soul and make it come to life."
In other words, drawing or sculpting living things is an affront to the Almighty. Thus, Taliban radicals came to see the destruction of ancient art, like the Bamiyan Buddhas, as the fulfillment of Quranic law. And now the destruction shifted into high gear. At the National Museum, Taliban thugs smashed hundreds of pieces of art. At the presidential palace, they slashed forbidden paintings. The nation's entire film archive, some 50 years of history on film, began going up in smoke. And under an increasingly radical ideology, the Taliban began destroying lives.
The Taliban would say, the Hazaras are not Muslims. We should kill the Hazaras.
Bamiyan native Mirza Asaim is a member of the Hazara ethnic minority. In the Sacred Valley, he witnessed the Taliban's campaign of ethnic cleansing.
Once, I went to a place. There was a mass grave of 200 people. In another place, there was another mass grave of 200. They killed 2,000 to 3,000 in all.
In one raid, Asaim claims, 2 of his children died of fright. He thought the Taliban couldn't hurt him anymore. Then, at gunpoint, he was forced to commit an act of infamy.
They came to my house. They arrested me in my house. They tied our hands. They tied a rope around our waists. They would take us to the head of the giant Buddha. They tied a rope around our waist and suspended us from there. We took drills in our hands and installed explosives. There was a terrible sound. When you looked, it was all fire, smoke, and dust. Whenever I see these empty places, I feel as if it is the day of my death. I was thinking, my God, when will my death come? When will they drop me down, kill me, and bury me here? What a horrible time it was.
It is this act of senseless destruction that the first major open-air excavation in Bamiyan's history seeks to heal.
I think my father will find the sleeping Buddha. He's sort of a genius, and I know that he knows what he's doing. And I know for a fact that he will find it.
Dr. Tarzi believes he's closing in on a statue that rivals any wonder of the ancient world, the sleeping Buddha of Bamiyan. After all, he relies on the word of a holy man who actually saw it, a Buddhist monk who's been dead for some 1,400 years. His name was Xuanzang, and in the 7th century AD, he trekked from China to India in search of sacred Buddhist texts. In 632 AD, Xuanzang had Bamiyan in his sights.
These people are remarkable among all their neighbors for love of religion. There is not the least absence of earnestness and utmost devotion.
After a long desert trek, Bamiyan must have been a vision of unsurpassed splendor. Xuanzang had arrived when the Silk Road oasis was at its zenith. What unfolded before him was a valley lush with agriculture and a vast royal city. But the valley's centerpiece would reward every arduous step of the pilgrim's journey of faith, the giant Buddha of Bamiyan.
To the northeast of the royal city, there is a mountain on which is placed a stone figure of Buddha, 150 feet high. Its golden hues sparkle on every side, and its precious ornaments dazzle the eyes by their very brightness.
Xuanzang arrives here, and he is blown away by the gold, by the flames on the shoulders, by the mask. That description has to be the one that was situated where we are today, the 55-meter-high Buddha.
But according to Xuanzang, that wasn't all there was. Somewhere lay a third Buddha, more than 1,000 feet long. Part scholar, part detective, Dr. Tarzi knew that to find the sleeping Buddha, he first had to locate the monastery that housed it.
To the east of the city, 2 or 3 li, there is a monastery in which there is a figure of Buddha lying in a sleeping position as when he attained nirvana. The figure is in length about 1,000 feet.
Could Xuanzang's description be true? If so, hidden under centuries of earth, the monastery wasn't giving up its secrets. To unlock them, Dr. Tarzi had to get inside the head of the monk and plot each step of his journey.
De la ville royale, il arrive au Grand Bouddha.
From the royal city, he went to the big Buddha. Between the 2 Buddhas, he arrived at the monastery of the ancient king. He left there and arrived at the 38-meter Buddha.
That's the smaller of the 2 giant Buddhas which once stood here. Then came the critical last leg of Xuanzang's journey.
Il vient de la ville royale.
He leaves the royal city and travels a distance of 2 to 3 lis. He arrived at the eastern monastery, the monastery where he found the 1,000-foot Buddha.
Pinpointing the eastern monastery's location has thwarted explorers for the better part of a century. Xuanzang's starting point, the royal city, hasn't been precisely located. And his unit of measurement, the ancient Chinese li, can mean 1/3 of a mile or 4/10 of a mile. That left acres of ground to explore. Tarzi and his team dug test trenches for 1 year, then 2. Still, no monastery.
The excavation from the first year was over there, where the wheat is. This excavation showed us that there weren't any buildings in this area. So we decided to not excavate any more in this area, but moved over there, where there are more relics.
Over there, at the end of year 2, Tarzi struck pay dirt. Outlines of an immense structure unlike any he'd seen before. Could this be Xuanzang's monastery?
This year's excavation is a difficult one. It's like an autopsy of an enormous cadaver. I'm a bit lost in the guts, because the cadaver is huge.
For Tarzi, one feature of the building provided a tantalizing clue. Structural supports designed to accommodate something of monumental size and weight.
Look, take a look in this area. There is 1 wall, 2 walls, 3 walls, 4 walls. These walls were constructed very intelligently so that they would support an immense amount of weight. I think that we might be at the terrace level, where the big Buddha's feet might have been. In any case, it's very exciting. We have to be patient. We're looking for something big.
Yet already the archaeologist has extracted art objects nearly as extraordinary as the Colossus itself. And these exquisite Buddhist sculptures raise Tarzi's hopes that he's found Xuanzang's monastery.
From the moment that I found this collection of statues and the other things that we have found this year, God willing, we are in the monastery where the 1,000-foot sleeping Buddha was found. We are sure that we are in a monastery. 100% sure. I was going to say 1,000%.
But has the sleeping Buddha, like these sculptures, survived the onslaught of 1,400 years? Dr. Tarzi and his students are due back at school in France. He has just a week to find out. Dr. Tarzi is far from alone in his quest to right wrongs committed by the Taliban. He's part of a brotherhood of Afghan artists and art lovers for whom the destruction of the Bamiyan Buddhas became a thundering call to arms. With courage and ingenuity, they began fighting back.
I became very sad when I heard that the statue in Bamiyan had been destroyed. A rumor was spreading that the artwork exhibited in the National Gallery and the National Museum would be the next victims.
Mohammed Youssef Asefi is a medical doctor and prominent Afghan painter. For him, the Taliban's reign of terror hit home when henchmen slashed artwork at the presidential palace and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Some of the paintings were Asefi's own.
I must tell you, I wanted to cry. I had painted my paintings with a lot of delicacy, and now they were torn up or destroyed beyond repair. How could this happen?
With the paintings of the National Gallery at stake, Asefi devised a plan that could have gotten him killed. he volunteered for a job restoring paintings that had been damaged during the wars. Once inside the gallery, Asefi needed an accomplice. He found one in Inayat, a member of the National Gallery staff who shared Asefi's contempt for the Taliban. Risking their lives, Inayat and other staff members brought endangered paintings to the room where Asefi worked.
I worked in this room, but back then, there was no furniture, desk, or chair. There was nothing here, only a rug. I would place the paintings in a corner and work on them.
It was here that the real sleight of hand took place. The Taliban condemned paintings that portrayed living things. Dr. Asefi made the offensive elements disappear.
I suddenly came up with the thought of using watercolors on top of oil paintings to hide the unacceptable parts. My trick worked. The paintings did not show that they had been retouched or converted.
Month after month, Asefi and his accomplices ran an art rescue factory right under the noses of Taliban religious police. The penalty for such organized treason? Probably death.
Whenever they would come, I would lock the door. The doctor was inside. He would stop his work, having understood that somebody was here. Naturally, I was afraid, because the Taliban were everywhere.
Ultimately, Asefi's team put about 80 retouched paintings back on display. The Taliban inspectors never noticed their subterfuge. After the Taliban's fall, Asefi simply wiped off his handiwork.
Despite all the suffering and hard work, our goal was to change something, and we did it.
Besides art, the Taliban regime seemed to declare war on fun. Bird fights, dancing, even kite flying were banned. Today, Afghans show they haven't missed a step. For Dr. Victor Sarianidi, the main show is just ahead. This afternoon at the presidential palace, the Russian archaeologist hopes to witness the opening of a treasure he has not seen for more than 20 years. Only he can verify if it is real. And that's where Victor's friend and National Geographic fellow Dr. Fred Hebert comes in. He will be in charge of scientifically cataloging the gold to promote research and exhibition of the rare objects, if they're there.
Oh!
Finally, the wait is over. The destination, the presidential palace. The mission, to determine if the Bactrian horde still exists.
We're going to go through a series of checkpoints, and we're going to then proceed through the front gate of the presidential palace.
Deep within the innermost chamber of the presidential palace, tensions are high. Could the Bactrian gold have survived the civil war and outlasted the Taliban? Will the safes said to contain it be empty? Bad news. The key to the safe is nowhere to be found. It was probably lost years ago. If the delicate treasure is inside, will it be damaged by the saw's intense heat?
My heart was just trembling. I was worried about the gold, I was worried about the artifacts, I was worried about everything.
Over 20 years of waiting finally comes to an end. The first object emerges from decades of mystery.
This is the first piece.
A golden floret hairpin Dr. Sarianidi pulled from the earth a lifetime ago.
It's like seeing an old friend again after 25 years. You didn't even know if he is still alive, and now you realize he's right here, waiting for you.
On a winter's day in 1978, Sarianidi first laid eyes on the object. About 2,000 years before, it had belonged to a nomad woman, perhaps a princess. She had likely been buried in secret, her grave unmarked. This would prevent thieves from looting the royal cemetery.
We think that the royal family probably buried their dead in this old ruins because the ruins had ghosts that would keep people away. So the burials were safe for 2,000 years.
The princess was between 25 and 30 years old. Adorning her were layers of dazzling gold jewelry. No one knows how she died, and little is known about how she lived. Her people, Bactrian nomad warriors, had once been little more than illiterate bandits. But by the princess's time, they had learned the ways of commerce and grown rich as middlemen on the Silk Road. Silk Road trade would enrich her region for 1,000 years more. And within 400 years, it would fuel an artistic golden age at its great oasis, Bamiyan. In Bamiyan, Nadia and Dr. Tarzi clean Buddhist sculpture created during that golden age, around 500 AD. They come from an excavation Tarzi believes is the monastery that will reveal his personal holy grail, Bamiyan's sleeping Buddha. To Dr. Tarzi, it's unsurprising that the monastery is rich with Buddhist sculptures. This region was one of the first in which Buddha was represented in human form.
Before that time in India, Buddha had been represented by symbols, footprints, a tree. It's because of Greek influence that Buddha is represented as a human, because the Greeks were already attributing male or female traits to Zeus, Aphrodite, Venus, and Athena.
In Afghanistan, this Greek influence dates from Alexander the Great's invasion around 330 BC. The conqueror established cities and left behind garrisons of soldiers in what's now Afghanistan and Pakistan. When Buddhism spread westward from India in the centuries that followed, it was met here by descendants of Alexander's armies. They had a taste for depicting their gods in human form.
The hair imitates the hair that you find on Greek statues, the Greek profile as well. It is said that the image of the Buddha was influenced by the image of Apollo. Look here. The nose is an extension of the forehead, which is typical of the Greek profile. The wide open eyes and the very natural mouth are also part of the Greek conception.
These remarkable busts may be all the treasure Dr. Tarzi discovers this year. He's mere days away from the end of the digging season, and still no sleeping Buddha. And now it's time for his daughter Nadia to return to her home in the United States.
I don't think my father will be discouraged if he doesn't find the Buddha this year.
I'm not disappointed. I'm patient. You have to look at this as if you were from the outside, because otherwise you will burn out.
The archaeologist is resigned. Then something amazing happens.
Let's go look at the surprise, the big discovery. We found 2 meters of painted clay laid out horizontally. It's part of something of considerable size. You see, I had been thinking about going back to France and finishing the report on this year's dig. But this changes everything.
What Dr. Tarzi has found may be the foot of the sleeping Buddha of Bamiyan.
This large piece is bothersome because it corresponds with what we are looking for. It's not really bothersome. It's wonderful. But the fact that we are finding it at the end of this year's excavations is bothersome.
Significantly, the supposed foot is right where it should be, near the monastery's western side. By tradition, sleeping Buddhas are aligned with their feet pointed west and their heads east. The architecture Dr. Tarzi has uncovered fits what would be required to support a massive object oriented this way. A Buddha on the edge of nirvana, embodied in a form 1,000 feet long. Working quickly, Tarzi and his team exposed paint adorning the mysterious mound. A chemical solution heightens the colors. But now the archaeologist is on the brink of a painful decision. Should he continue excavating the supposed foot, or cover it and resume his search next year? Some of Afghanistan's cultural warriors don't have to wait to savor the fruits of their devotion. At Afghan Films, the National Film Archive, a cast of heroes takes in a show of treasures once thought lost. When the cultural legacy of Afghanistan came under attack, its vast archive of historic films became even more important. That's because many Afghan treasures now exist solely as images captured on celluloid. Yet the Taliban set out to destroy even this, the archive of Afghan films. What they didn't anticipate was that the archive staff was willing to die to stop them.
We were very upset when the minister of the Taliban brought the order to burn the films. We felt our hearts pounding. We became emotional.
Here, they burned the films here. We have the evidence. They burned them in front of me. That day, it was like a dearest friend is being killed in front of you. That day was the darkest and hardest day for us. You plant a tree to collect its fruit. We worked for our people to have the archive, and they burned it.
I became irrational. I decided to throw myself and the Minister of Information and Culture into the fire with the films. At that moment, one of my colleagues grabbed me and stopped me.
But the Taliban didn't know that the staff had handed over film prints, which can be replaced, and not negatives, which cannot. When the prints ran out, the filmmakers knew the negative archive would go into the flames.
We all had the same idea, that we had to preserve the archive of Afghan film at any price, even by paying with our lives.
But how to hide the main archive, some 2,900 rolls of irreplaceable negatives? Their plan was simple.
Come on, come on.
They hid the archive by hiding the room.
In order for no one to notice the door, we installed wallboard from here to the ceiling to here.
With the help of an electrician, we also disabled the lighting system so that the wall was darkened.
Dozens of times, religious police walked past the fake wall, never suspecting the room beyond. The rescuers' lives were safe as long as the ruse held.
The Taliban told us that even if a small piece of film was found, we will hang you or shoot you in the ditch where the archive was burned.
The Taliban minister said, if we find another film here, we will burn it along with you.
Month after month, the staff sweated through surprise inspections and the Taliban's insatiable demand for films to burn. Their countrymen assumed the archive was lost. But when at last the Taliban fell, the archive's rescuers brought the negatives out of hiding. Hailed as heroes, they shrugged off the acclaim. But they saved their Taliban-era IDs as mementos of a time when they would have given their lives for the art they love.
Even if we lost our heads, it would have been an honor and privilege. But we didn't allow our heritage to be destroyed. Why? A country which has no culture has no history.
Now, Afghan history is in the making at the presidential palace. After examining several gold objects, Victor Sarianidi has no doubt. This is the treasure he excavated in 1978. But is the gold all here? The only way to know is to open all 6 safes and catalog their contents. They have just seen a fraction of the collection.
142.
But already everyone in this room knows they are part of something extraordinary. The unveiling of one of the largest gold treasures of the ancient world. Once, this statue of Aphrodite lay upon a princess's chest.
Aphrodite is a Greek goddess, and you can see that it's a very classically inspired item. But it has some differences. The wings on the figurine are not typical for classical period. And it has a little dimple on the head, just like the dots in South Asia of Indians. So you can see in this one piece, you have this interesting local style, which shows sort of a melting pot of artistic traditions, very much a metaphor of the Silk Road being a melting pot of peoples.
On the princess's head lay a collapsible crown. Locally made, it could be broken down and fit into a saddlebag, befitting the princess's nomadic way of life.
The treasure is really important for Afghanistan because most of the pieces are clearly made here. And I think that this has some great use for the Afghan people as their cultural heritage. It's their past, and it can be their future.
Inside, today's cataloging is about to come to an end. But now at last, Victor Sarianidi can put to rest doubts he's carried for decades. His remarkable contribution to Afghan history was not lost.
For me, it's a great day. For 25 years, I thought the treasure was lost. I think it's a great day not only for me, but for all of mankind.
Bamiyan's great day, when past terrors will be redeemed, is still in the making. The sleeping Buddha may lie here under a thin layer of earth, but to preserve the object that might be its foot, Dr. Tarzi orders the site filled in.
The big fragment deserves to be studied. It's too bad that we can't continue to do so right now. But you shouldn't excavate impatiently, because things can be destroyed when you work in a hurry. But you have to have hope and dream about what might happen next year.
Though the sleeping Buddha's discovery lies somewhere ahead, across Afghanistan there is already much to celebrate. Afghans are busy building a future from pieces of the shattered past. At the National Museum, restoration is guided by the very spirits of history.
I think that the sculptor who created this with such beauty, he is here at this very moment. I always see him next to me. And why not? The lives that have passed today, their art, their knowledge, and the beauty of their country, their language, their race, all of these are evident in their art.
A nation stays alive when its culture stays alive. Our people should know what happened. They should know about their culture, about their history.
Not far away, Dr. Youssef Asefi is finding a new way to preserve Afghanistan painting. He is building an art gallery for the future.
Hopefully, we can have a gallery to attract young artists to enjoy and work better. For me, it suffices to be a good guide and provide assistance to young people.
At Kabul University, the next generation of sculptors creates art once deemed illegal. And now there's a place for women as well as men. In Afghanistan, the past is painful, and the present calm all too fragile. But now, for the first time in generations, rescued treasures are in full view. They encourage Afghans with the strength of their past and offer hope for tomorrow.